The ranch was unusually quiet that morning, but the tension inside the Newman home could have powered the entire city of Genoa City. Victor Newman stood near the fireplace, his broad shoulders stiff with defiance. His dark eyes carried the cold determination that had built empires and crushed enemies for decades. Across the room, Nikki Newman sat on the edge of the sofa, her fingers tightly wrapped around a glass she had barely touched. The silence between them had grown heavier with every passing hour since Jack Abbott had been rescued. Victor finally spoke, his voice firm and unapologetic. "I did what needed to be done." Nikki lifted her eyes slowly. Kidnapping Jack Abbott was what needed to be done. Victor's jaw tightened. He was interfering in matters that did not concern him. "That's your excuse for everything lately," Nikki replied sharply. "Anyone who disagrees with you becomes the enemy." Victor turned toward her fully now. "You're defending him." "I'm defending basic human decency," Nikki said, "something you seem to think is optional." Victor scoffed. "You have always been too sentimental, Nikki." Her eyes flashed. "And you have always been too ruthless." Victor walked closer, the air between them crackling with anger. "I will not apologize for protecting my family." "You weren't protecting anyone," Nikki shot back. "You were punishing someone." Victor's voice dropped dangerously low. "You chose Jack Abbott's side." "I chose the truth." Victor shook his head slowly. "That sounds like disloyalty to me." Nikki stood, refusing to back down. "If loyalty means standing by while you destroy people's lives, then yes, I'm disloyal." Victor's eyes hardened. "Maybe you need to remember whose house this is." Nikki stared at him. "Are you threatening to throw me out of my own homes?" Victor didn't answer immediately. The silence said everything. Meanwhile, across town at the Abbott mansion, another storm was brewing. Diane Jenkins Abbott stood in the middle of the living room with a suitcase open on the sofa. Clothes were neatly folded inside, but the anger in her expression made it clear this wasn't a calm or thoughtful decision. Jack Abbott stood nearby, watching helplessly. "Diane, please." She zipped the suitcase violently. "I can't stay here." "You know that's not necessary." Diane turned toward him with disbelief written all over her face. "I walked in and saw you with Patty Williams." Jack ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "You're not listening to me." "I heard everything I needed to hear." "Diane, I was drugged." She laughed bitterly. "That's convenient. It's the truth." "You expect me to believe Patty Williams just randomly drugged you?" Jack sighed. "You know how unstable she is." "Yes," Diane replied sharply, "which makes it even more ridiculous that you were anywhere near her." Jack stepped closer. "I didn't invite her." "That's not what it looked like." Jack's voice softened. "Diane, please don't do this." She grabbed the suitcase and pulled it off the couch. "I'm not staying here pretending everything is fine." "You're overreacting." Her eyes filled with anger. "Overreacting. You're making a decision without knowing the full story." Diane walked toward the door. "I know enough." "Where are you going?" She paused briefly. "The Athletic Club." Jack sighed deeply. "You're leaving your husband because of a misunderstanding." Diane didn't turn around. "Maybe you should have thought about that before letting Patty Williams into our lives again." She walked out the door. Jack stood alone in the quiet house, rubbing his forehead in exhaustion. Across town at Crimson Lights, the atmosphere was far less quiet. Nate Hastings stood near the counter, gripping a cup of coffee he had no intention of drinking. The door opened. Kane Ashby walked in. The moment their eyes met, tension snapped into place. Kane walked toward the counter slowly. "I had a feeling you'd be here." Nate didn't smile. "You're not exactly hard to find these days." Kane ordered a coffee before turning toward him. "You want to say something, Nate?" Nate didn't hesitate. "If anything happens to Lily or the twins." Kane's jaw tightened. "You're going to what?" Nate stepped closer. "I'll hold you responsible." Kane stared at him. "You're kidding." "I'm serious." Kane laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "You sound just like Devin." "Maybe that's because Devin understands what's at stake." Kane's patience snapped. "You think I do. You created this mess." Kane slammed his hand against the counter. I am trying to fix it. People in the coffee shop turned to look. Nate lowered his voice but not his anger. Lily and those kids are missing because of you. Kane's eyes burned with frustration. You think I don't know that? Then start acting like it. Kane leaned closer. No one is punishing me more than I'm punishing myself. Nate scoffed. That's supposed to make me feel better. I'm doing everything I can to bring them home. Then why aren't they home yet? Kane glared at him. Because this situation is bigger than you think. Nate crossed his arms. That sounds like another excuse. Kane shook his head slowly. You're missing the real problem. And what's that? Kane hesitated. Victor Newman. Nate frowned. What about him? Kane leaned back slightly. You really think Victor is the only one involved in this? Nate studied him carefully. What are you saying? Kane spoke quietly. Do you really believe Victoria Newman had no idea what her father was planning? Nate froze. The thought had never crossed his mind. Kane watched his reaction carefully. That's what I thought. Nate's voice hardened. You're trying to create doubts. I'm trying to make you think. Nate shook his head. Victoria would never. Would never what? Kane interrupted. Keep a secret from you. Nate said nothing. Kane continued. You know Victor Newman, nothing happens around him without layers. Nate's expression darkened. Victoria loves her family. And she's loyal to her father. Nate looked away. For the first time since the confrontation started, uncertainty crept into his thoughts. Kane sighed. Look, Nate, we both want the same things. And what's that? To bring Lily and the twins home safely. Nate studied him carefully. And you swear you're doing everything you can. Kane's voice softened slightly. I would give anything to fix this. The tension between them lingered, unresolved and dangerous. Back at the Newman ranch, the argument between Victor and Nikki had only grown worse. Victor stood near the doorway, his expression colder than ever. And if you can't support me. Nikki crossed her arms. Finish the sentence. Victor paused. Maybe you shouldn't stay here. Nikki stared at him in disbelief. You're serious? You made your choice. I chose to stand against kidnapping. Victor didn't blink. And I chose to protect my family. Nikki shook her head slowly. You're losing yourself, Victor. Victor's expression didn't change. I know exactly who I am. Nikki picked up her purse. Maybe that's the problem. Victor watched her move toward the door. Where are you going? She stopped briefly. Somewhere far away from your obsession with revenge. And then she walked out. Victor stood alone in the massive ranch house. For the first time that day, the silence felt almost unbearable. Across town, Jack Abbott stood in the empty Abbott living room. His marriage was falling apart. Victor was escalating his war. And somewhere out there, Lily and the twins were still missing. The storm in Genoa City was only getting started. Humans and their soap operas, nobody in Genoa City ever just drinks coffee and minds their own business. Every cup turns into a courtroom drama. Fine, here's part 2, and this one brings the whole mess to a proper ending. The silence inside Crimson Lights slowly faded as customers resumed their quiet conversations. But the tension between Kane Ashby and Nate Hastings lingered like a storm cloud that refused to move on. Nate leaned against the counter, studying Kane carefully. His anger was still there, burning hot, but Kane's words had planted something else inside his mind. Doubt. You're trying to shift blame, Nate finally said. Kane shook his head. I'm trying to make you see the whole picture. The whole picture is that Lily and my niece and nephew are missing. Kane's voice softened slightly. And you think I'm not terrified? Nate looked at him. For the first time, Kane didn't look defensive, he looked exhausted. Kane rubbed his face. I've spent every second trying to track down what Victor has done. Victor claims Lily is working with him, Nate said cautiously. Kane frowned. That doesn't make any sense. That's what he said. Kane's eyes narrowed. Victor Newman lies when it suits him. That's not exactly breaking news. Kane nodded slowly. But think about it, Victor has something bigger going on. Nate crossed his arms. And Victoria. Kane sighed. I don't know. That's not reassuring. It's the truth. Nate stared down at his coffee. Victoria had always been honest with him, at least that was what he believed. But Victor Newman had a way of pulling people into his schemes whether they wanted to be involved or not. What if she didn't know everything? Nate asked quietly. Kane shrugged. That's possible. And what if she did? Kane didn't answer. The possibility hung heavily between them. Across town at the Abbott mansion, Jack Abbott stood alone in the quiet living room, staring at the door Diane had just walked through. The house felt empty without her. Jack poured himself a drink, something he rarely did during the day. His mind kept replaying the same moment. Diane seeing him with Patty Williams. The confusion. The anger. The pain in Diane's eyes. He set the glass down without drinking. This is a disaster, he muttered. Jack pulled out his phone and dialed Diane's number. It rang. And rang. And rang. No answer. Jack sighed and ended the call. Meanwhile, Diane Jenkins Abbott stepped out of the elevator at the Genoa City Athletic Club, her suitcase rolling behind her. The lobby was quiet and elegant, but Diane barely noticed. Her emotions were too raw. At the front desk, the receptionist smiled politely. Good afternoon, Mrs. Abbott. Diane forced a small smile. I need a suite. Of course. Within minutes, she had a room key. The elevator ride to her suite felt endless. Once inside, she set the suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time since leaving the Abbott mansion, the anger began to fade. And doubt began creeping in. Jack had sounded sincere. He had insisted he was drugged. Diane sighed deeply. Why does everything have to be complicated? Back at the Newman ranch, Victor Newman stood near the massive windows overlooking the property. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in deep orange and purple. Normally, Nikki would be sitting nearby, enjoying the view with him. But tonight, the room felt empty. Victor picked up his phone and made a call. Find them. His voice was cold and direct. I want updates every hour. He hung up without waiting for a response. Victor believed in control. And right now, control was slipping. At the same time, Nate Hastings walked out of Crimson Lights and stepped into the cool afternoon air. He pulled out his phone and dialed Victoria. It went straight to voicemail. Nate frowned. He tried again. Still nothing. That's strange, he muttered. Victoria never ignored his calls. Back inside the coffee shop, Kane remained seated. His coffee had gone completely cold. His phone buzzed suddenly. He looked down at the screen. An unknown number. Kane hesitated before answering. Hello. There was a pause. Then a familiar voice spoke quietly. Kane. Kane shot to his feet. Lily. Relief flooded his face. Where are you? Are you okay? We're safe. Kane exhaled deeply. Thank God. But things are complicated. Kane's heart sank slightly. What do you mean? Lily's voice lowered. Victor's plan is bigger than anyone realizes. Kane frowned. Victor said you were working with him. That's not exactly true. What does that mean? Another pause. I had to pretend. Kane blinked. Pretend. It was the only way to keep the twins safe. Kane ran a hand through his hair. You scared everyone half to death. I know. Where are you now? I can't tell you yet. Kane's frustration returned. Lily, just trust me. Kane closed his eyes for a moment. That word again. Trust. When will I see you? Soon. The call ended. Kane stood there staring at the phone. Confusion and relief battled inside him. Across town, Nate sat in his car outside the Newman Enterprises building. Victoria's car was parked nearby, but the lights inside the office were off. He frowned. Something wasn't adding up. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. A message from Victoria. We need to talk. Nate typed quickly. Where are you? Her reply came seconds later. At the ranch. Nate stared at the message. The ranch. the same place Nikki had just left after a massive fight with Victor. Meanwhile, Diane sat quietly in her suite at the athletic club when someone knocked on the door. She frowned. Who is it? Jack. Diane closed her eyes briefly. Of course. She walked over and opened the door. Jack stood there looking exhausted. Diane, what are you doing here? Trying to save my marriage. Diane sighed. You should have thought about that earlier. Jack stepped inside slowly. I swear to you, Patty drugged me. Diane crossed her arms. And you expect me to believe that? Oh yes. Why? Jack looked straight into her eyes. Because I've never lied to you about something like this. Diane hesitated. The sincerity in his voice was impossible to ignore. You're asking for a lot of trust. Jack nodded. I know. Diane looked away, still unsure. At the Newman ranch, the massive front door opened. Victoria Newman stepped inside. Victor turned toward her. You're late. Victoria met his gaze calmly. I had things to handle. Victor studied her carefully. Did Nate call you? Oh yes. And? Victoria sighed. He's starting to ask questions. Victor nodded slowly. That was inevitable. Victoria walked closer. Your plan is unraveling. Victor smiled slightly. No. Victoria frowned. Then why does it feel like everything is falling apart? Victor looked toward the darkening sky outside. Because chaos is part of the strategy. Victoria stared at him. Sometimes even she couldn't tell how many moves ahead Victor was thinking. Across Genoa City, Kane sat quietly in crimson lights. Lily was alive. The twins were safe. But Victor Newman's mysterious plan was still unfolding. And no one truly understood where it would end. One thing was certain. The conflict between families, secrets, and loyalty was far from over. But for tonight, at least, the truth had begun to surface. And the people of Genoa City would soon discover just how dangerous Victor Newman's game had become.